Okay. Hello and welcome to 1 hour webinar, multi-layered activities for an online and traditional classroom. This event is brought to you by LBI FIB UI. In this session, we welcome you to participate actively. And later, I would like to introduce our special speaker today. So for those of you who have just joined us, please don't forget to introduce yourself in the chat box. You can tell us your name and then where you're from. And later, we'll also hope that you can participate more by responding to Yuta's questions during the session. Okay, so let me introduce Yuta Otake first. Yuta Otake is from New York City. After completing his MA in TESOL, he worked in Indonesia, and then he now lives in Tokyo, and then he's going to share some knowledge that will be very useful for everyone here. Okay, now in this webinar, just like I said before, please participate actively in the chat box, and then please ask questions in the Q&A only. So we will select some questions in the Q&A, and we will address some of them. We know there might be so many questions that we cannot answer all, but we will make sure that we can answer the most important one. And then please wait for information regarding certificates and the recording of this session at the very end. So please join until the very end. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Yuta Otake to start his session.
Hello, hello, hello. Thank you very much, Memi, for your introduction. Let me just quickly share my screen. Okay. All right, so the screen is up, correct?
Yes.
Cool. All right. Hello, hello again, everyone. Thank you again, Mimi, for your introduction. I'm very happy to be here. You know, on Zoom, it's very hard to know who all of the participants are, or even how many people I'm talking to right now. But my feeling is that I know many of you already. You know, it is a very small teaching world. So I'm very happy to see you again. And thank you for coming. I hope you're staying safe. For those of you who I have not met yet, very nice to meet you. My name is Yuta. As Memi mentioned, I was an English language fellow in Indonesia for 2 years. And recently I was traveling across Indonesia on my own. My goal was to go from Sabang to Merauke, but unfortunately I had to stop in the middle because of Corona. And so now I'm kind of just waiting in Tokyo. So that's where I am right now in Japan. So again, thank you all for coming. I'm very happy to connect with you all in this way. I've been thinking about Indonesia a lot and all my friends there. And I'm very happy to wear my batik again, because I usually don't have a chance to wear it anymore. So again, thank you everyone for coming. I'm so happy to connect with you all here. So I wanted to start with this picture on the screen, because this was my last event in Indonesia before I had to leave due to Corona. This was in mid-March. I think it's around the time that all of us stopped going to school or stopped seeing our students. And I'm sure you're all the same as teachers. Like, we see these pictures and I really miss the classroom. I miss the energy of the classroom. I miss when students can just hold hands and laugh without masks. I miss all of those things. And you know, it's like these moments when we realize that it's like the chaos and the exhaustion, all of those things of being in school is kind of what makes it human, right? Like, that's what makes school school. So I miss that a lot. And I think our job now is to be patient. The time will come when we're back in a classroom. So we want to be better than ever before when we're back in the classroom. So on that note, let's begin. So again, for those of you who I have not met, very nice to meet you, or nice to see you again. So I'd like to start with just a mini kind of ice-breaking activity. So as I mentioned, I've now been in Tokyo in quarantine for about 2 months. And over those 2 months, I've been doing many new things. So I've been doing new things, and I want you to guess what they are. So it's just guessing. Let's use the chat function to guess what I've been doing. So during the lockdown in Tokyo, Utah has been blank. So let's use the chat function to see what you think. Let me get the chat back up.
Okay, there are so
All
many.
right, there's a lot of people eating ramen. That's good. Staying at home and reading. I love that. Teaching online,
Okay.
cooking, watching Netflix, sleeping. Ooh, someone said gardening. So I'm going to stop there and go back because whoever just said gardening, which is, who was that? Anyway, sorry. That was correct. One of the things I've been doing is I'm a city boy. I'm from New York City. So while at my grandmother's house, there's a big garden and I've been gardening a lot. So for example, I have eggplants, I have chilies, it's just a lot of gardening. Another thing I've been doing, which is completely probably surprising for those of you who know me, is I have become vegetarian. So now for about 6 weeks, I have not had any meat. And, you know, I love nasi padang and I ate too much nasi padang in Indonesia. So now I'm just trying to do something different. And also I've been running a lot because sometimes like if we stay in our room so much, I feel like I'm going crazy. So I try to run and take some time to think. All right, so just catching up on these chats right now. Nasi padang is the best, I agree. Okay, but what I really want to focus on now is, of course, in addition to trying gardening and being vegetarian and running, is as a teacher, I've been trying to take this time to really think about how I taught before and how I want to teach differently moving forward. Because, you know, the world is changing and I don't want to be the same teacher that I was before when we go back into school. So before I tell you about how I want to teach differently, I'm really curious about all of you. So now that we have all this time at home, how do you plan to teach differently as we go back into schools, maybe next year or hopefully this year? So the question is, how do you plan to teach differently as we move forward? So let's discuss this a little bit in the Zoom chat. So maybe example, right? Example, maybe you plan to take the students outside the classroom more often, right? Or you plan to make them move more, just anything. So let's share some answers on that in your chat. More blended learning. ICT. Ooh, using real life experiences more. More singing. Great. Applying Clio. All right. Thank you very much for these guesses. I think it's important, right? Part of reflecting is really taking this time to think about what we've done in the past and how we want to be different, because with everything happening, it's not okay for us to enter the classroom next time being the same teacher that we were in the previous pre-corona world. We have to be different. So I kind of want to show you what I've been thinking about in terms of how I want to be different. And so in this regard, this webinar is a little bit different because usually we share things we've done in the past. But today I want to focus on what I want to do in the future. So it's kind of more like what I wish for, right? What I want to do. So 2 years ago, I had a seminar at UI and I introduced sorry, I introduced this activity. I remember introducing this activity the last time I had a workshop at UI. So the activity is very simple. The students come to class, I have a fun picture on the board, and there's a prompt like, what is the chimpanzee thinking about? And I like this kind of activity because it's light and students can be creative. They can kind of think casually in English before doing something else. So this activity is great. And just to give you an example, last year, one of my students had this answer. If you know the Rihanna song, Under My Umbrella, Ella, Ella. So I thought that was great. So this activity is great, and I plan to continue to use it, right? It's not that this activity is wrong. I love this activity, and I plan to continue to use it. But one thing that I want to do differently is maybe I use this picture on Monday, but on Tuesday, I would use a picture like this. So you can immediately see the picture is not as light, right? It's not really as light. It's more serious. It's something that's really happening in the world today. So I don't know how much coverage this is getting in Indonesia or what kind of information is out there. But starting in America, there's been this huge movement called Black Lives Matter against police brutality. And so I was thinking, as I move into a future classroom, I really want to not just start with something like this, which is really, really light. Sometimes I want to incorporate serious issues like this, things that we really need to talk about as people, as students. I'm going to come back to this picture. I want to first share, when I was a grad student, one of my lecturers gave me this letter that someone wrote that I've been thinking a lot about. So I want you to all just take a minute to read it to yourself for a little bit. So just please read it. So one thing that this letter is mentioning, this is not a light topic, right? But what they're mentioning is they've seen people who are educated, they've seen people who went to high school, who went to college, who end up killing people, who end up hurting people, right? So I'm very suspicious of education. And in this time, especially with everything happening in America, that's something I've been thinking a lot about, and how can I change my role as an educator, as a teacher, to better address these issues. So going back to this picture, right, this is just one example of many issues, many problems that exist in our world, in our countries, in our societies. And, you know, I can't help but recently think about how, as teachers, we have this really unique position in society in which we have people from different backgrounds who will have different futures, who will have different roles in society, from different economic classes, from different races, from different religions, from different sexual orientation, from different interests. We as teachers have this very unique setting in which all of those different people are in one place, right? And it's something that often I feel as teachers, me, myself, I don't take advantage of. Like, I don't take advantage of that unique position, unique opportunity to teach all of these different backgrounds, different people. So in teacher training, we always learn about lowering the affective filter. The affective filter meaning that in order to teach effectively, we need our students to be emotionally safe. And like, you know, I'm sure this is true for, it has been true for me. I'm sure it's true for so many of you. Like we are kind of scared of conflict in our classroom, right? Because we want to create harmony. We want all our students to get along because we don't want them to get too emotional and debate, or we don't want to create unnecessary division in our class. So for example, this is my friend, Mr. Hasrul in Kalimantan. He's really trying to lower the affective filter and bringing these different people together. So that's great. But one thing I've been thinking about is that sometimes because we feel so inclined to create a harmonious classroom where our students get along, right? And there's peace and there's a comfortable environment, that sometimes because of that, we don't talk about things in society that need to be discussed, that need to be addressed in a classroom, because we feel like, oh, if I talk about that, my students will divide, or my students will argue, or some students will get too emotional. So sometimes, because we want to lower the affective filter, what we're doing is we're not talking about things that what we should be talking about, right? And as I mentioned earlier, you know, school is one of the few places sometimes, often, when all of these people from different everything are in one setting. So if we don't talk about it in that setting, when are they going to talk about it, right? And often what happens is they don't. And the next time something happens, it becomes a protest where there's violence, where it's just extreme levels, right? Because we didn't talk about it before when we should have. So I guess the point I really wanted to ask is, are we creating a safe space, right? Lowering the affective filter, if students are not really developing, expressing, having chances to discuss and change their opinions on these complex issues, right? Like, is it really, really a safe space? Or is it just kind of on the surface, it looks harmonious, but maybe it's just because we're not talking about these issues. So going back to even something like this, I can't help but think that it's possible that these people once used to be in the same school. And maybe when they were students, if we as teachers had addressed racism more directly or addressed police violence more directly, we would have less of these police violence incidents, right? Because we talked about it when they were students. And even this was the first picture that I started with. This was Camp Epic X. It is a Relo and American Coroner program in Pontianak. And, you know, the students here are so happy to be together. This is harmonious. So it is lowering the affective filter, but it's also true that when these students leave this environment, there will be religious conflicts. There will be gender inequality. There will be all of these different problems, domestic violence. And sometimes, like, we're creating harmony in the classroom, but then the moment they leave the classroom, they have all these different things that is real life. And maybe because we were afraid to talk about it in the classroom, they're not ready to talk about it in real life, right? So this is a quote that I really like. So while it is easier for us to try to avoid real world social issues in the classroom, it is more beneficial for our students if we treat them as complex people in a diverse, complicated world. And I think there's a balance, because if every day that we go into a classroom, we're talking about these kind of controversial issues, that's also problematic, probably, right? Because, for example, if our job is to teach English, yeah, of course, we have to focus on teaching English. I guess my point is we just can't always avoid showing a world that is very complex and diverse and full of problems. So we must really address these issues in our classroom. We have to talk about it, right? Because someone just wrote in the comments that they might be happy in the class, but they might not be happy outside, right? So then that's not really lowering the affective filter, right? I agree, because maybe in class they feel safe, but there's domestic violence at home. And if we're not talking about it, nothing ever changes. That student will continue to go back home to domestic violence, right? So I think that's where we have to be more courageous to address these issues. So I think the question is, how do we do it? And I think that's more difficult. Like I mentioned before, this is something I also want to try more. So it's something not even that I've done a lot, it's something that I regret not doing more. So that's something I want to change. So how do we integrate these issues? So I've been thinking a lot about how we need to incorporate materials and media that represent that kind of real world, right? Because sometimes we all use different materials. Indonesia has a different curriculum, different schools have different textbooks, but you know, sometimes the reading texts are like, what's a good example? Like maybe, how do chimpanzees eat? You know, like very, still informative, very important, but it's very light, right? Like no controversy, nothing to debate. Or like Justin Bieber's new song, right? These are all fun, but it's kind of very light. So sometimes while doing those, we also want to integrate materials and media that are more real, that are more diverse, and don't have just one simple answer. So the question is how? Like, I just have one example here. So as a Japanese American, I remember the first time my teacher had a text that was about Asian American immigrants. It really felt like, oh, this is something that represents me. This is an opinion that I can understand, that I can relate to. So I think having all these different materials and media and text where different students in your class can relate to and hold an opinion, that becomes very, very crucial. Another thing I was thinking is relating to someone is mentioning critical thinking. I think part of critical thinking is the ability to see things from multiple perspectives. So there's many ways to do this. It could be like role play, where you role play, debate, but you're assigning students not just to be in the opinion that they hold, but you're assigning them to think from another perspective, right? So to think from the perspective of another religion, or to think from the perspective of another gender, right? And this is just one example. I've done this a lot in Indonesia, actually. It's called two-voice poems. So you have two perspectives that are talking alongside each other. I am Batman. I am the Joker. I am a hero. I am a villain. But then there's a similarity. I have secrets. So these are just mini activities that really help our students think from both sides, different perspectives that are not just their own. Another thing is, I think it is really important to talk about current events. And it's kind of a material that is always available. And I think even as a teacher, I feel like I regret not using current events enough. So how do we use current events? I think we can do something like current events sharing, where every week, maybe like 4 students are responsible for sharing a current events article. And it's just like a quick summary and also some follow-up questions like, this happened in our society today. What do all of you think? How does it make you feel? So just simple ways to bring current events into our classroom. Or something more complicated, more complex, maybe for university, is double entry journals, where students read an article and then they relate it to your own life, and then they write a short reflection. So just simple ways to, this is very advanced, definitely, but different ways to bring current events into our classroom. The other thing is, I think the most complicated thing, I assume most of you are English language teachers. I think the hardest thing is the content is really great, right? But like, how do we find things about that content in simple language? Where if we teach SMA, if we teach high school, right, the language is very limited. So how do we talk about current events? How do we talk about complex issues, right? So I think the key is simplifying and scaffolding the language. So for example, let's say we want to really address issues that are in our society. Graphic organizers really, really help. You can see this is a very beautiful graphic organizer that I made. But for example, I would put USA in the middle, so my country, right? And then the three bubbles surrounding it would be social issues. So example, I have an example here. And then from the social issue, we have to, as someone mentioned, we have to mind map the reasons for those issues. So it's going USA. Okay, I wonder what a problem is in the USA right now. Okay, high number of corona deaths. Okay, why do we have high number of corona deaths? So in SMA, in high school in Indonesia, I know cause and effect is part of the curriculum, right? So for example, high number of corona deaths, why is that happening? Oh, maybe racial inequality, political turmoil, lack of public health care. So then I'm kind of in simplified language, creating a complex, talking about complex issues. All right. So then I think it becomes more possible to put this into English language. So cause and effect, right? This is huge in the high school curriculum. So there are a huge number of corona cases in the USA because of racial and economic inequality. I know you guys teach like because, due to, all of those things. And then finally, I would really push my students, this is like final steps, is what are some solutions? So you have the cause, you have the effect. Now, what do you believe, in your opinion, right? What are some solutions? And I think we want to get our students accustomed to saying, in my opinion, right? The government must learn from this experience and provide national health care. So just something simple language, but the content is very diverse, very complex. So lastly, I guess what I really wanted to emphasize is, as teachers, we really are in a unique position. That's something I've been thinking about a lot, because as teachers in one community that we call a school, we have all these people from different places, from different religions, from different backgrounds, different races, all of these things. And that's the moment, right? That is the right moment to start talking about these issues before they enter the real world and things start to bubble, and they bubble under the surface and they keep bubbling. So I think it's our job, it really is our responsibility to continue to talk about the world that is more diverse and more complicated. Because at the end of the day, you know, present continuous can only take you so far if you're not capable of talking to people from different backgrounds, if you're not capable of thinking critically. So I think that is also part of our duty, because like that letter that I showed you said, it's kind of a very serious responsibility for teachers. Like, we're supposed to prevent all of these problems from happening, right? Even things that are happening now with Corona, where all of these problems are coming up. And everyone causing a problem used to be a student. They all used to be students once. And we have to understand that we as teachers can prevent a lot of those problems depending on how we teach. And, you know, harmony is important. Having a happy classroom with smiles is important. If you know me, I really believe in that. But also sometimes we have to mix it up, and we can't be scared to talk about these things that we're sometimes kind of scared to talk about, you know? So for our exit ticket, you can share it in the chat, or you don't have to. You can just think about it to yourself. My final question to you is, so what are some issues in Indonesia that should be addressed in a classroom, but often are not? So in America, there's a lot, but you know, because I don't know Indonesia enough to talk about this. I think this is something that all of you know better. So what are some issues in Indonesia that should be addressed in a classroom, but often are not addressed? So please think about this. You could share it in the chat, or you can just think about it. Religion, corruption, child and sex abuse, definitely Papua, terrorism, gender equality, LGBT. These are great. Bullying, feminist. Child marriage, that's right. Yeah, so for all of you following the chat, you can see there's so many things, right? And I think I can see from the way you're sharing these that as teachers, we all do feel this kind of reluctance to talk about these things in the classroom. And like I said, I'm not telling you to go to your classroom and suddenly share all of your political values. What I'm just saying is we have to create a space in which our students can talk about it with each other, when they can share their ideas and then also leave room to modify those ideas, right? Because we have to really learn to talk about it, change our ideas, get better. That's how things change. So thank you very much, everyone. That is what the note I want to add on. I really appreciate it. And let's move to questions. Thank you, Memi.
Okay, thank you very much, Yuta. Wow, we still have plenty of time to discuss the questions, so I'm sure that all of us are excited. So let's see. Yuta, we have 12 questions so far in the Q&A, but you already mentioned one issue which is important, right? About our own belief or our own personal opinion about some current issues. That one was also asked by one participant here. How to maintain our neutrality on certain issues, because we teachers might also have opinion or belief or ideology on the issues.
I agree. I think this actually is the reason why a lot of teachers are afraid to bring it up, is because, what do you think? I think this is where we stay neutral, but information is information. So you all know this, and now more than ever, so much information that students are getting is just not correct. Like, it's just not factually accurate. This is a huge problem in America right now, where even before holding the opinion, like, that information that they're getting is false, right? So I think as teachers, part of our job when bringing these things up, so let's say we're bringing up Black Lives Matter and police brutality, right? We just have to make sure that we're presenting what the real news is what are the numbers? I think that can be our biggest responsibility, because when students go on their own to Facebook, that's when it gets really extreme and often not accurate. So I would say our biggest role is making sure that the information that they're basing their opinion on is correct, like real information.
Mm-hmm. So making sure that they get real information, right? That's
Right.
our main responsibility. And yeah, I think it is also important to know that as teachers, we're not supposed to impose our own values, right? But we just want to make sure that they are open-minded and they are aware of the current issues that matter in this world.
Correct. I absolutely agree.
Okay, let's see. There is also a question about how to adapt this for younger learners.
Mm.
Some of this can be quite, hard to discuss with young learners. Can we
I
use
think,
this kind of activity with lower level students and young learners, I mean?
sure. I think so. Just in my background, because I used to work for Sesame Street, which is this children's educational TV show that really focuses on, I think that's when with children, we focus on the media itself. So it's not necessarily, not yet like asking a 7-year-old, what do you think about this? Maybe that's too much, right? But it's more of the teacher making sure the books we use, right, are the characters diverse? Or in America, just using America as an example, like, do we have any stories that we're reading at school that have immigrants or that have people like me growing up, right? Like, I think that's where, as teachers, as I mentioned, we have to show a diverse world. And for early children, for early childhood, maybe it's not so serious. Like, what do you think about this social issue? But it's more just showing that the world is not just one thing, that's oversimplifying. So we have to make sure they understand it's diverse, it's complex.
Okay, so for instance, perhaps teachers teaching young learners can also introduce stories or news about people of colors instead of perhaps just the majority.
Right. Correct.
All right. How about lower level? We discussed how to address these issues for young learners, but how about students who are still very limited in terms of proficiency?
Yeah, so again, I think when the English is very limited, there's going to be a limit to how much we can ask students to express themselves, and that's normal. And we can't push our students to express something that they can't yet, right? In terms of language. So that's where, if that's the case, I would just really emphasize what is the information that they're getting. What does the media, what do the materials show? What kind of just what are they getting in the classroom, as opposed to asking them, please express your opinion. There has to be a balance.
I see. And of course, we need to adjust the input for the students also, right? Just like what you said.
Of course, of course.
Simplifying.
But I think when it comes to input, this is something that all of us as educators, again, I don't know in the Indonesian context, but like in America, we've been fighting for more materials that really show a diverse and complex world. And I think the more we create these materials, the more available they will be. And again, I don't know in Indonesia, but I think it becomes very important.
Okay. All right. There's also one question which is very fascinating. And I think most of us can relate to that in Indonesia. I think, while this anonymous attendee asked, I think debate is a good mean of teaching speaking skills. Yet I carefully select the topic because I do not want to address issues that the majority feel uncomfortable talking about it, such as religious issues. How do you deal with that?
I think debate, I agree. because especially, I've been to a lot of Indonesian debate competitions. I don't think that is the format. I don't think that's the format for something even like religion. So I think I don't want all of you to misunderstand that. Like, what I want is in our classroom setting, right? Especially as teachers, as good teachers, we're lowering the affective filter. We have a setting in which students are supposed to be trusting each other, right? So I feel that's the platform in which we can still ask them to share their feelings about something, to talk openly. Like, if there's a religious minority in your class, right? Maybe it's just about giving them a moment to share how it feels to be a minority in that class. But I would never ask that student to debate in front of the school.
I know.
I think that's kind of where I stand on that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Wow, we have more and more questions now. Okay. Most of my students like reading, so they don't know much about current issues. Sometimes it's difficult to discuss because they cannot respond, probably because of their limited knowledge. So what should teachers do in this kind of situation?
Good question. I think that's where, like I mentioned, I think the first question, right, was how do we keep our views out? How do we stay neutral? I think that is our biggest job. So if students are not interested in current events or do not have access to current events, that really becomes our job to create a simplified, maybe if students don't understand the original article, we have to simplify it for them, right? We have to rewrite it and make that available. So I think that becomes our job.
Yeah. So it will require extra preparation, but I think all of us can agree that this is worth it. It's worth the extra effort.
Yeah, and that's something where even if students say they're not interested in current events, I don't want to judge all these different materials, but sometimes we have materials in like reading text that is so neutral, or not even neutral, like, I think current events, once students get into it, I think are always interesting. I find it hard to believe they're not that interested, because it's real, it's something they go home to every day.
Okay, yeah, and then I noticed that there's also another question. How about the teachers themselves? If the teachers don't have enough knowledge and understanding, they might not be willing to discuss these current issues. What is your opinion on that?
So I think this is, again, something that I deeply felt about myself over the last 2 months, where I'm like, okay, I want to bring more of these issues into my future classroom. And then I'm thinking, oh, okay, that means I need to really understand it. And again, I'm not talking about sharing your opinion. I'm talking about making sure that as a teacher, it is our moral obligation to share accurate information, right? This happens everywhere, where teachers are sharing things that are not accurate. And I think that is a huge problem. So I think as teachers, our duty is to make sure we know what we're talking about, not necessarily as an opinion, but as information. So if you're going to bring these things into your classroom, you have to read up, you have to do your research. You have to make sure when students ask you about it, you're not making up a number, you're not, like, we have to know. Yeah. So I think that's our job.
Okay, and then there is this question about how to apply this in online teaching, because probably this is more ideal, or this is easier to do in a traditional classroom where we can see the students and have a face-to-face discussion.
So I think, again, one thing, I don't know how all of you are doing the online teaching, but one thing that a lot of online teachers feel is sometimes you have more work, right?
Yeah.
You think it's easier to do online teaching because you're like at home or whatever, but you have to do an even better job. I think you have more leverage in terms of what materials you ask students to read, for example, right? You have more leverage in terms of even discussing something anonymously becomes much easier on the online platform if we choose to do so. We can still do breakout rooms. So even let's say we want to talk about the experience of being a ethnic minority, for example, right? To have 10 minutes in our next Zoom to talk about their experience, right? Their feelings, and then we discuss it as a group. So I think this is still possible, but I agree, we miss the classroom, and that's always the face-to-face when it comes to real issues is always going to be better.
Yeah, that we just have to make do in this challenging situation.
Yeah, it is what it is right now. Yeah.
It is what it is. There's also a question about time management, because sometimes when we would like to discuss something like this, the discussion can be quite long, and then probably when we have to follow a particular set of curriculum, our choice of topic might not really fit in the curriculum. How should we juggle all of these aspects?
So this question comes up a lot, obviously, for a variety of workshops. I think I don't have as teachers, like if I'm a teacher in New York, it's my job. If I feel the curriculum is not appropriate, I'm going to fight it. Not necessarily in my classroom, but systematically, we have to fight things that we believe are not best for our students. And I would put that responsibility on all of you as Indonesian teachers, right? That's part of our job as well. I feel like I'm just making our job that much harder. But if we feel the curriculum is not diverse enough, if we feel there's information that is not accurate, it's our job to do something about it. And I'm not saying to have a revolution in your classroom and get fired. What I'm saying is teachers have to band together. This happens in America. You have to talk about it with other teachers. You have to systematically try to request changes. And I know this is it's not an easy solution, but that is, that's what we have to do.
I know.
And that's what all of these protests in America are about right now. The reason why people are voicing such anger through these protests is because they want systematic change. And I think as teachers, that is also our heavy duty, very heavy.
Yeah, and probably we can also focus on the objectives. Probably if the language objective is something that we can relate to our topic, at least we can still, how do I say this? It's like a negotiation, right? That we try to mix the fixed curriculum with our effort to discuss current issues and critical thinking, let's say.
Absolutely. If like Memi said, if it can be integrated, just keep integrating. My previous answer was more in regards to like if there's this really strict curriculum that you have no flexibility over. But if you're doing cause and effect language, right, and you can make it about social issues, then that's your chance. So you have to jump on that chance.
Yeah. There's also this question about the dynamic of the class, because we are trying to establish a safe atmosphere, right? That everyone is safe to share their feelings and their thoughts. But sometimes students, I think this is also a classic question, can be dominant, while others can be very inhibited. So how do you deal with that?
So this is like any issue, like when there's a bully in a classroom, right? This applies to all these situations where the truth is the student life outside of the classroom is going to be the same thing. When students go home, the problems still exist. When students grow up, these problems exist. So that's what I mean by, as teachers, we have to bring it up now. So when there's a dominant student who tries to always push their opinion, that's our job to pull them aside and teach them that. It's like, hey, you're not good at listening to other people. You need to learn how to listen to other people's opinions, even if you don't agree. So that's where we use our job as teachers to teach them that, right? Like I wish someone had, I don't want to get political, but even like, I wish someone had taught our president, Trump, how to listen to other people, you know, like this is just a very extreme example, but it's like, people need to be taught that, right? Instead of like, you're not always right, you know? So I think that's part of our job, yeah.
Okay. All right, since our session's title is multi-layered activities, there is this question about this multi-layer. How do we guarantee this multi-layer will be effective? It seems we teach 4 students characters. How do we bridge schools and communities? How to link our classroom to the community, I guess?
So I think, you know, in my experience, Indonesian schools are actually usually very good at this, where you do a lot of things outside of the class, like there's community service work that you're doing. It's even something like surveys. If you're doing something in the classroom about different identities, maybe it's like, I've seen a lot of Indonesian students like running around the school, interviewing different people, right? So I think, or interviewing their families. I think there's all these different kind of project-based things where we can really create these layers that go from a classroom to their home, to their community.
Okay, all right. So that should answer the question. Now, there's also this question asking for your own personal best examples in covering this topic, how to discuss current events in classroom. Can you share your experience, Yuta?
Sure. I think because I know someone asked about this earlier, I think one of the challenges to all of these is, sorry?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think one of the challenges is, time, right? And when we have the curriculum, I think it's simple things like the same way we have the student whose responsibility today is to like take attendance or something like that. It's just about creating these systematic. So what I used to do is really have a current events time. So it would just be once a week, first 10 minutes to start. You don't make it so complex, you know, it's still complex issues in a simple way. So 2 students, they present, they've basically summarized a current events situation very quickly, breakout groups, talk about it. You know, we don't have to, and then I'm just walking around kind of moderating, making sure they're talking about it the right way. And I think it's simple things like that that work the best.
Okay, in your experience, the one that you just said, were your students ESL students, that English was their second language or the first language?
Yeah, so I think with ESL, I usually have to wait until about university or possibly high school. You know, every high school in Indonesia is different, but depending, right? Again, you know, like I say all these things, but we cannot push students to express something beyond their language. That's just, it's not reasonable. So that's where teachers have to make a judgment there. And like, I just want to emphasize that if students cannot express it yet, then it's just about how do we control the media, you know? So they're still getting that content, but not having to express themselves about it. Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, this is also interesting because it involves parents. How should teachers try to teach this issue if probably the parents have an opposing idea? For instance, probably we would like to address domestic violence, but then perhaps their parents agree with corporeal punishment, let's say. So how do you deal with that?
So I think one thing that's difficult for teachers is I also want to separate opinion versus things to understand. as teachers so that we have a very firm stance. Like, I don't want to sell my opinion on X, but then there's also certain things in life that I just feel are not an opinion. Like, I don't know in Indonesia, right? But just as an example, domestic abuse at any level in America is just, it's not legal. So that's where I don't have to debate that with you as a parent, you know, like, I'm right, because that's not an opinion, you know, right? So I think it's important to also know for which issues there is a right and wrong, and then for which issues there is a perspective. And on those issues, like, be very clear about how you're not promoting X. You're just creating a platform to talk about it.
Yes.
You know, which I think those two things are very different.
And it's good that we make it clear first, right? Here in the session, because I know that perhaps attendees still have a lot of questions about how to, how to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, we're running out of time for the discussion. Probably Yuta, do you want to choose one question yourself for the final question?
Sorry, there's so many. I haven't really been able to keep track.
Okay, it's okay. All right, the neutrality question has been asked again and again. So let's see. Okay, so this is probably something that can be the conclusion in a way. Do you think language teachers should be knowledgeable of cross-cultural understanding then? I think this is quite an easy question.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And I think cross-cultural sometimes just means like we think of that sometimes as just America, Indonesia, but you know, it's much more than that. It's understanding the dialogue between different groups in Indonesia, between different islands, between different genders, you know, so yes, absolutely, yes. And the most dangerous thing as a teacher is to talk about these issues and provide wrong information. You know, we have to really take that responsibility seriously. Like, our job is to provide accurate information, and I cannot emphasize that enough.
Yeah, so as teachers, as English teachers, our job is not only to teach them tenses and so on, right? Just like what you said, it is our moral obligation to really prepare ourselves with all this cross-cultural understanding so that we will be able to help create a safe space for students to discuss current issues and some things that can be quite hard to discuss in class. Okay. All right. I guess that's all for the Q&A. I apologize for all participants who already asked questions, but we simply cannot discuss all of them. We hope that we can have another session on this probably in the future, because I know that 1 hour will never be enough to discuss this interesting topic. Okay, Yuta, do you have a final statement at the end to your audience before I
thank you. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Memi, very much. I know this is very complex and heavy, but I think this is a starting point. It's just, I really wanted to share with you what I've honestly been thinking about during the last 2 months, and hopefully as we continue forward, this is something we all just keep considering, you know, as we move forward. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Yuta, can I please share some information on the screen that will record?
Of course, I will stop sharing now.
Okay. So everyone, as promised, I would like to give information about this, but let's once again give a big round of applause for Yuta for his very fascinating session, which is very important also. Okay, so for those of you who are curious about your certificates and recording of this session, because you would like to see this session again, We will send you certificates to your email 1 week at the latest from this session, and the recording will be provided at LBE's website also. So we hope that this session can help us reflect on our role as teachers and to motivate us to keep developing ourselves, not only professionally, but also personally as well. How to make sure that we are open-minded, how to make sure that we are aware of the latest issues and have the courage to discuss the issues in our classroom. So for those of you who would like to discuss or learn more about teacher professional development, at LBE we have Teacher Training for Beginners program. And if you are interested in learning more about teaching techniques, you can send email to info.lbeue@gmail or our website. And then for information, you can also contact our email. Sorry for the typo. It should be info.lbeue@gmail.com. And then since this session shows that teachers think that there are so many things that they need to keep learning, and then bringing multiple perspectives is important, we're thinking of giving a series of short professional development series as well. And this will most likely to be one topic that you shouldn't miss. So please check our website and also our social media to know more about this. Okay, so Yuta, once again, thank you very much. So thank you also everyone for participating. We hope to see you again in other webinar from LBE. Bye-bye.
Bye.